So hello everybody, as you just introduced, I'm senior editor of PocketGamer.biz, Craig Chapple. Have we got our panelists in the room, do we? If we do, could you all come up on stage? I'll let them introduce themselves in a bit more detail, but we've got Simon Spaull from Applovin. We've got Alexander Krug from Softgames. We've got Christian Calderon from Gamejam. Mark Ettle from Cobra. And I apologise if I pronounce it wrong, but Gaurav, Agarwal from Gamezop. We got enough seats? I'm standing, whereas you guys. The microphone should just be right in front of you if you want to grab some. We good? All right, so if you could all introduce yourselves in perhaps a bit more detail and your experience in what you're doing. So, Alexander?
Yeah, I'm Alexander Krug. I'm CEO and co-founder of Softgames. We're one of the leading developers on Facebook Messenger. Till today, like around 100 million users played our games on Facebook Messenger, including Cookie Crush, Solitaire Story, Space Invaders, and a lot of more games. We're in the HTML5 game space since 2012. We've built over 500 hyper-casual games in HTML5. And happy to be here today.
Hi, I'm Simon Spaull, Managing Director for Applovin in EMEA. We're a comprehensive mobile platform that enables mobile developers of all shapes and sizes to reach and find their ideal consumers around the world. We have 7 offices globally. We're hitting around 65 billion ad requests daily. We've worked with pretty much every developer there is in the mobile gaming space. And obviously there's a lot of up-and-coming indie devs, which we're very keen to talk to and help those guys get global success as well.
Thank you. Can you hear me? My name is Gaurav. I represent a company called Gamezop. We are in the HTML5 game publishing business since the last 3 years. Instant Games is one of our platforms where we have 15 games live. Otherwise, we have a catalog of close to 250 games that we distribute across about 80-90 countries on a daily basis with a user base of about 2.5 million users on a day-to-day basis. Happy to be here and very happy to engage with any of you interested in HTML5 games even after this panel.
Hi, I'm Mark Ettle, Cobra Mobile. We're quite a small developer, but we've done quite a lot of hyper-casual games, casual games, and on the messaging side, we've been quite prolific on the iMessage stuff for Apple, which has done quite well. Anybody wants to know about that, please come and grab me. That's it.
Hey everyone, my name is Christian Calderon. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Gamejam. We're a new startup focusing on hyper-casual games. Prior to that, I was the CRO at Ketchup. We made games like 2048, Stack, Balls. And before that, I was a VP at Dots, focusing on revenue and monetization. We made a game called Two Dots. It was pretty popular. And before that, I was like an investment banker. So nothing relevant.
All right, thanks. So we're going to discuss keys to success in hyper-casual and messenger games. We're going to kind of split this in two a bit. There'll be some crossover, but we're going to start with some hyper-casual chat. And I guess one of the first questions is, I guess we probably all know what it is, but how would you differentiate what we're calling hyper-casual now compared to the games of old? Because short snackable sessions in casual is nothing new, but hyper-casual is. So is there a difference?
That's a great question. I too have trouble answering that. When we started first making these games, the goal was to make a game that everyone could play. When we made 2048, no one called that a hyper-casual game. But retrospectively, if we look back at it now, we classify it as a hyper-casual game. So it's really interesting. I think. I wish I could give you a really strong answer to that, but to me, these games have always been the same. There hasn't really been any difference. When we launched Dots, still low CPI, like very casual type of game. Games before that, Flappy Birds, very similar type of gameplay and usage metrics. So to me, this like hyper casual label is just it's a really interesting way to categorize these games. I guess it's good for investment if you're looking to raise $200 million. To me, nothing's changed. It's the same type of games with the same goal of making a game that everyone can use.
Just to add to that, we actually coined the phrase internally a while back, and one of our employees claims that he actually came up with the name hypercasual.
We published it on PocketGamer.biz.
yeah, so we want to take credit for that anyway, but it was purely based on session time and just the style of game. But like Christian said, looking back, for me, Snake is a hyper-casual game. So it's been around for a long time. I think it's just a way of creating some more buzzwords. It's good for you guys. It's good for us. It's good for investors. And yeah, that's where it went.
Yeah, we can create a whole panel track about it. So, when it comes to development cycles for hyper-casual games, should these be games that you can develop really quickly, or can they be games that you can spend many months on and polish? And is it worth that time investment?
Yes. From a development perspective, yes to both. One of our most successful hyper-casual games took 2 weeks from start to finish. We've done others which have taken 3 months to kind of finish. From a development standpoint, it's really simple. We're all, kind of going back to your first question, we're all focused on what's the core mechanic and does the core mechanic work? And once we have that, the truth is, how do we monetize it? Okay. So from our perspective, it's how can we get that to the market as quickly as possible and test that it works and then iterate it from there. And our average is about 6 to 8 weeks now.
I think one of the things that we keep at the forefront of our decision making when it comes to speed and time is, where is this particular hyper casual game going to see the light of the day? If we are talking about a messenger platform, I think to take a game live on a messenger platform versus taking probably the same game live on a website with a lot of user activity are two different entities in themselves. At least what we have tried to do is, when we are building specifically for the messenger, we have focused on a lot of quality over churning out the quantity of titles. We actually burnt our fingers. We tried to put a lot more games in the beginning, but we realized that on the chat messenger, on any messaging platform, that's not going to take off like it would anywhere else, where users are organically finding these games a lot more. So I think the destination where you put these games should be kept in mind while trying to find the right answer, or parts of the right answer to that question.
What are some of the? We touched on it a little bit with the core gameplay, but what are some of the key design considerations for hyper-casual games? Like, how simple do they have to be? And then when you start adding stuff, well, I guess, when does it stop becoming a hyper-casual? I don't know, Simon or Christian?
Yeah, go for it.
From a game design perspective, we just think about what is the user doing every 1 second in concentric circles, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds from a game design perspective. And I think similar to what Simon mentioned before about session time, hyper-casual games typically have more sessions, smaller session times. Total time spent actually can be pretty big if there's more sessions. So thinking about those loops and what is the user doing every 1 second, 3 seconds, extremely, extremely important in hyper-casual. And so we really think about that and iterate on that. In terms of like the metagame elements, features surrounding that, what the user is doing every day, 2 days, 3 days, a lot of times these can be modularized and used and applied to different games very similarly depending on what the core game is. But that core gameplay is like every 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, really, really important for us from a game design perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, although, but I think measuring it by seconds is probably a great way of doing things, and that should definitely be the part of building a game. What we try and do differently, and what we've seen working for a lot of HTML5 games is, although it's hyper-casual, by definition, nothing should still stop the game developer from segmenting the users after some activities happened. So I think what error at least we made in the beginning was we kept the experience entirely the same, because we wanted to keep the design principles really, really simple, because if the design is complex or if there is too much of an onboarding required, then it doesn't remain hyper casual anymore. But after the users have spent some time, if the interface could smartly change for those who have spent more time versus those who have spent less time, that could make a sea change in as far as user activity is concerned.
Did you want?
I'd just kind of chime in from a development standpoint. One of the things that we do is that we generally, for anything that's in the hyper-casual, we can prototype it in 2 to 3 days. And we have a sort of an internal core loop and how it works and where do we stick the monetization points. But it's touching on what you said. There's certain games, when they move from hyper-casual to casual, the monetization changes. So when we work, we kind of know from previous data what works in hyper-casual and then how to monetize it and how quickly it is. But if it's going to, from an onboarding perspective, if we have a thing, if it takes more than usually 5 to 10 seconds for somebody to get what the game is, it's not hyper-casual.
Did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say from our side, it's more on the marketing side. People typically have come to us with the game ready to go. But obviously once you launch, you see the data very, very early on, and really for us it's the data that dictates that. We've seen creatives and different types of creatives help you then influence your game design. So if there's a certain character or icon that works very well in a creative, then we've seen developers then go back and actually implement that into their game. So you can test and iterate very quickly and very fast using that methodology. That certainly push it out there. I mean, I've seen a lot of buggy hyper-casual games, and they're still hugely successful. I'm actually interested to see if the bugs help the retention, because sometimes for me, when it's frustratingly buggy, I still go back and play it later if it's a good hyper-casual title, and I wonder if I'd have done that had it not been so buggy and I could have just finished it the first time around. We probably pushed things slightly too fast, but it's not necessarily been detrimental. We've managed to iterate on that and using advertising and making sure that the economics and everything else was set up correctly, we can still push it and create quite a large global success from that.
Yeah, sometimes bugs add a little bit of charm. Other times they're game breaking, but
I don't think
it's a bit balance. We touched upon it on this as well, but what should developers really know about engagement and retention in hyper casual? So, are you expecting high churn rates? How long should you be expecting people to be playing and coming back for? I'm sure this differs from hyper casual game to hyper casual game, but do you have any general benchmarks as well you could share?
I mean, our usual goal is 50 to 60% day 2 retention, and then 20% day 7. Anything that's hitting those numbers is doing pretty well.
Well, we're kind of 40% to 25% between day 2 and day 7, and then we're kind of hoping to have 20% by day 30. But touching on what you said earlier, a lot of that is in the first month getting the data and very, very quickly iterating to what the players are actually wanting.
I look at it from an ROI perspective. So if you have a high CPI threshold, then you typically need a much higher retention threshold to accommodate for that from an LTV perspective. If you have a very low CPI, then sometimes you can get away with much smaller day 1 retention numbers. So for example, games like 2048, Pop the Lock, these aren't 55, 60% day 1 retention games, but they were hugely successful. Also, they had almost a zero CPI because there was no UA done. But depending on your game, your distribution strategy, it really matters. I think if you're doing a lot of user acquisition, typically I always want the highest day 1 retention. If your CPIs are in the range from 30 cents to 50 cents, you have a 2 to 3 cent ARPDAU, you're probably going to want somewhere between a 50 to 60% day 1 retention for day 1. And day 7, around 25%, day 14, around 10%.
We were talking a bit about, just before this, about ad tech, and really that is, I guess, part of what actually makes hyper-casual that new genre, weirdly, is the ad side of it. But I think, Christian, you were talking about the kind of ad tech that really enables hyper-casual to scale profitably. Could you explain a bit about?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So again, like coming back to like Ketchup, when we were making games, we never looked at like a lot of this data because it was just about how fun the game was. We looked at a game, if it was fun, okay, let's publish it. Now with the emergence of like user acquisition becoming more democratized and ads LTV, the ability to kind of measure this information, it makes it a lot easier to scale. For example, like when we were marketing Two Dots, we got it to #1 in over 100 countries. A lot of that was driven by paid user acquisition because we could measure it. At that time, it was a lot more difficult to measure ads LTV, but with the emergence of technology allowing you to measure it more accurately, more easier, it makes these decisions less risky, knowing what your ROI is going to be, how profitable is this going to be. So I think as the technology gets better, it's more easier to measure this. It's a lot safer to spend money to drive these games. It's not that the CPI's ever changed. They've been pretty much the same for this category. It's the ability to measure it and know what your return on ad spend is a lot easier than it was before. Does that answer the question a little bit?
Yes. Very, very technical for my journalist brain. I guess to round up hyper-casual here is so, now that we're all talking about it, does that mean like the opportunity's gone? And so really, how big is the opportunity? Can indie developers get in on it? And if they can, does that still mean they need a partner? There's a few questions there.
No, yes, and yes.
I can't even remember the order I put them in. So.
No, it hasn't gone. They're just games, in my opinion. They've got different titles now, and the lines are blurred as we discussed. But absolutely, there's always an opportunity to create a compelling, exciting game. And the fact it has a short session time or a simple tutorial to get it up and running and play, that's never going to change. People are always going to enjoy those. It's more competitive, absolutely. I don't think there's a developer in the world I haven't met in the last 12 months that's asked me about hyper-casual. And many of those developers have never even considered casual games, but have now wanted to move into it because it's the latest thing. So it's certainly very popular. The competition purely means we just have to be better in creating those absolute unique, exciting games that people are going to play. So certainly we have to be, more selective, but we have to do the, much more due diligence to make sure that these titles really have a chance, from our perspective, obviously. And then I can't remember the last question. Is it going to go bust? Was it or pop or?
Yeah, it was really. I think it was. Is there space for indies? Do they have to partner with someone to actually make it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I personally, again, from our angle, we think it's very hard for an indie developer to go out there and have the knowledge and the resources to promote something on this scale. But I'm about to find out someone else's opinion. So yeah, I'm coming from our angle. We've helped a lot of indie, and it is a challenge. And obviously, you have big companies in this space spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes a day, on UA. So yeah, it's hard to get noticed and get up there, in the waterfall without spending some money. So we think that there is a requirement there, but hopefully someone else has found a way to do it without that.
Well, I'll jump in. I would say that up until about 3 or 4 months ago, if you understood marketing and were pretty savvy, do it yourself. A lot of stuff's changed technology-wise. A lot of user acquisition has changed. There's some great solutions out there that haven't been proven. But if you're a small developer with some great hyper-casual stuff, I think you need to be partnering with people now because it's so difficult to get past and this is going to sound really bad, it's so difficult to get past 1 million downloads. I always used to say that 100,000 was great, and then it was 1 million, and then it was like 4 million. But really, you need to be pulling down 10 million downloads to really be deriving it, worldwide.
You're still running UA for that, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, us is self-serve. So I don't mean using us, not an agency or anything, but we have access to a lot of publishers. I think without that, it would be quite challenging.
And I think that from a hyper-casual developer point of view, their time is way, way more better spent developing the game, iterating the game once it's been a success and driving that, and letting the partner go out and drive essentially the monetization.
Just really quick on that, since I've worked with so many developers in this category, like for example, Ketchup was only 6 people when we sold to Ubisoft. And a lot of people get surprised, but really, like, if you talk to any major, like, hyper-casual developer, it's usually, like, 1 person or 2 people. So, like, do they need to work with someone else? Usually, yes, because, like, things like data science, sometimes even art, other things outside of just the development and design, usually you need help with someone to get, help your game get to the top, or even maintain it once it's up there, like continuing to create content and things like this. So I think it's, yes, usually now you have to, I think, partner with someone and get help, not just for the UA, like to fund the marketing, but also to, like, to make the game, develop the game, polish the game, things like that. I think it's good to collaborate.
Cool. We'll move on to instant messenger games. It's kind of a similar question to what we just did, but just how big is the opportunity in chat app gaming? But also, what are the best chat app platforms that you're finding the most success on, perhaps, Alexander?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, we basically focus very, very strong on Facebook Messenger because it's basically, by default, the largest messenger in the Western world. So opportunity is like huge. You have like 1.3 billion people who are active on the messenger. But beside this, there are like tons of other messengers, right? So like when you look to Asia, WeChat for sure is like a huge opportunity. Then you have Line, you have Kakao, you have even Viber, and a lot of other opportunities. So yeah, I think it's huge, definitely.
I can't really speak about those. I can only speak about our experience from iMessage and working with Apple on that, and that's been quite an eye-opener. But it's been a fantastic avenue for our games and a way to explore. I suppose probably the best thing is the virality that takes over your games when somebody downloads it and starts playing it with their friends. The opportunity there is just immense.
Yeah, I think it's interesting regarding the platforms because the tech platform itself plays a huge role in how successful these games are, what the retention is, and so, like, for example, it's working on Facebook Instant. A lot of changes to the platform have happened, and it's relatively hard from a tech perspective to make really good games for this platform, except for the UA part. Because if you know how the algorithm works, and if like the talk here before, they had events that were highly correlated with day one with retention. If you know how it works, and if you're making games like that work for this platform, that's could be very lucrative for you because you don't really need to, at this day and age, don't really need to have a UA team funding the growth for these particular applications. I'm really interested. I haven't tried WeChat yet, but I've heard from friends in China that it's wonderful and it's doing really, really well compared to early days of Facebook Instant. So I think I'm looking forward to that opportunity. But yeah, definitely the platform itself from a technology perspective plays a huge role. I mean, these are like these games you have to load and you have to load. They can't be big and it's not like making a game in Unity, right? Like it's you have to take a different approach.
Is it a space that you're already making money in for those that are doing messenger games? Is it a profitable space already, or is that still got to wait?
I think just to tie this also in with the last question, at least with Facebook having led the way, now one knows that there are enough takers for HTML5 games, even in the messaging app space, right? So I think as far as the platforms are concerned, we've studied a lot of these platforms, and clearly from the feature set standpoint, probably Facebook leads the way, followed by WeChat, and WeChat's existed for longer allegedly in this space. But the fact of the matter remains that there are enough number of people who are putting that coin on HTML5 games, and not just messaging applications. So if monetization is the centerpiece of the jigsaw puzzle, which it is, I think ads is what's driving the revenue bit for us, at least right now, and for most of the other games on messaging applications. But in-app purchases are getting there. And even if Facebook is not to sort the in-app purchases entirely, some other messenger would. And as a whole, I think then the ballpark would begin.
I think it's profitable now, but like the moment it starts getting more saturated and you need UA dollars to compete, like what we've seen in hypercasual, this is a whole other ballgame. I mean, because like right now you're just paying for development costs and pushing your games up there, and that is just a small fraction of what your profitability is in games, right? Like when we think about games on iOS and Android, most of our budgets are not going to produce the games, they're going to market the games. So the moment where Facebook says, okay, where's the money, then it's a whole nother story. But I think for now, yeah.
When do you think that on Facebook the saturation will essentially arrive?
No idea. Yeah.
Anybody? Sorry, what was it? The saturation on Facebook Messenger games, when do you think that will arrive?
I mean, what I wanted to say is basically like Facebook Messenger as a platform is totally different to what you know from Android and iOS, actually. So there is no ad mediation, and you can basically do no in-app purchase on iOS, right? So you have like, let's say two major things, which or two major factors, which highly affect the revenue, right? So I think that's also the major reason why, for example, like UA is not common right now on Facebook Messenger, actually. But I think it's definitely coming, and I think it will come within this year. So it will happen. You have to have your games or your economy or, in general, the game design ready to afford user acquisition at some point. But what we see is basically, we launched end of last year. Before we've been always just using advertisement for monetization, so we just made dollars from ads. And then we launched in-app purchase, and we've basically, now we are 50-50. So, and that's only Android, that's a good thing there. So I think Facebook is doing a really good job there, helping us to get like the right metrics at some point, and for sure at some point they want all the money back through user acquisition, so that's clear.
So I was going to ask, what are some of the key design considerations for chat app games? Do they share some sensibilities with hypercasual, or actually they are completely different? Because I guess a social layer might be an example where it's
exactly. So social, I would say like social. So basically, right now it's all about. You started in the presentation before as well. Right now, I think you gain success on the platform as long as you create shareable moments. So when something is there, I want to share with my friends, then somebody's sharing it for sure. So we have to think about a different angle, let's say. I think that's the biggest value also the platform brings you, because this also helps you now to probably even skip the route with the UA part, because when people are sharing it like crazy and everybody's just clicking on the icons, then you don't have to pay money for the users, which is great. Another thing is we've been developing before like tons of hyper-casual games, so we've learned a lot from this part. So, and what we did actually is like we took the learnings from the hyper-casual part, what was working, what was not really working, and brought them now to the platform, let's say. And one thing I wanted to say like before as well is like, what we realized is, hey, just throwing a game on the platform has been working a year ago. So we launched like 80 games, made like woo, and we're not really caring about this, and they woo. Right. So live ops is super important. New features is super important. So not just launch them and just forget about them. That for sure doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I was so excited when the platform first opened up. I was like, oh my God, it's going to be like the Zynga days. It's just going to take all my games and port them over.
1 week was it like this?
It's going to be amazing. And it's like you take a game with like 50% day one retention, port it over, and it's like, what? 10%, 5% day one retention? What the hell? Is this even possible? Like, you have to really think about the platform and like social. It's like totally different. Like the feature sets, like what drives the player to stay in the game, and also the tech perspective. How do you make it super quick to load, like really easy to run through the UI and everything? Like the X button. You guys have an issue with the X button, and then they kept moving the X button around, and so it's like. We would have to do a heat map, and like if the X button was up here, we had no UI elements anywhere near the X button because we just didn't want people like their eyes to go, we didn't want them to see it. You know what I mean? So it's just like things that you don't normally think of when you're making a game on iOS. Like we said earlier, it's just totally different. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was a little bummed out about that. I was like, oh man, this is a great opportunity. It's gonna be so great, and then just totally different.
I was going to say, what are some of the, if you could elaborate a bit on some of the social features and how you can actually get players to be chatting with each other and then also share things with each other. That was something I was going to say, I've completely forgotten now. But can you elaborate at all on how to make social work on these platforms? And can you use bots, for example, on Instant Messenger, and how has that gone?
So as I said before, so people are willing to share as long as you give them a reason to share, or let's say I know, something funny or whatever they want to show to their friends. Then the bots are basically what you know from iOS and Android, like the push notifications. Recently, actually today, Facebook changed again the feature. Before, basically, whenever you started, like in the early days of the App Store, bot notifications were automatically activated. So you could just basically you get like 100,000 users, and you could send 100,000 users a bot message, which was awesome for retention. Now they changed it by today, actually. So you have to ask them, hey, do you really want to, you want to get notifications, messages, whatever. Let's see how this will, what kind of effect that this will have on the retention. But you can imagine it will. Most likely drop, actually. So we have to learn there again and iterate. But it's a new platform. That's also I think the interesting part, especially for developers, new developers who are moving onto the platform to find out, okay, hey, how can I tweak this kind of system? How can I find the nice ways to get the 50% or the 30% day one retention, actually? And but it's possible. We have games which have like these kind of very high day one retentions, actually.
We've found using really, really simple elementary things of sharing scores. People want to share scores, but making it really easy with a big button to share a score and making that really pretty and making it kind of integrate through. I mean, iMessage is great for having people's scores and what you've just scored, what they've just scored, and then sending that back, so you can almost get like a real-time scoreboard of what's going back and forth. But making it as simple as possible to understand and communicate, and that helps people just press the button.
Gaurav, you said earlier about ad monetization was actually the thing that was driving most of the revenue, but I don't know if Alexander, if you had the same experience, or do in-app purchases, are they making more money now, or is it an ads platform?
Yeah, I mean, I said, we've been pretty clear from the beginning that with ads only, at some point you will reach some kind of plateau. So you just need more users, but we can't afford users because of the UI costs, and so at some point we were basically deciding, okay, hey, we have to go in the direction of in-app purchase. It took us a while, actually. It was more than 3 to 4 months to really understand, once again, the platform, to understand the users, to understand or to build a system like the whole game economy like this, that, okay, hey, on the one hand you have the Android users who can make purchases, but on the other hand you have the iUsers who can't do purchases. So you have to build two different economies within your game there. But at some point we said, okay, hey, let's all in, let's launch it and see what's happening there. And then we saw pretty quick, actually. I think it was just from one day to another day that we actually doubled our revenues in one of our flagship games, which was Cookie Crush. And still, in-app purchase is now developing or generating, growing faster than the ad revenue at some point. So I would highly recommend to everybody to think about how can we implement in-app purchase, because as in the App Store, it's one of the best ways to monetize the users.
I think I completely agree because although ads is where we started, probably the time to think about in-app purchases within the hyper-casual setup on the messaging application, the time for that conversation is arrived. In fact, I think it arrived a while ago. So anybody who's not thinking about in-app purchases, only going the ads route, like you said, the plateau is not far away. At least if you're planning 2019, 2020, and if there are any developers thinking of games that way, then think of an economy, and hopefully, there would be methods to reconcile the iOS, Android differences by then as well.
And I think just one important thing to add here as well is when you compare once again like a messenger space with the let's say like native app store space, it will most likely never ever happen that basically Facebook will open up the inventory to third-party apps. So the whole ecosystem from the app space, like the app mediation, whatever company is there, this is basically not existent. So you just have one source for your demand, which is Facebook ad audience or audience network actually. So you're highly only dependent on one source, and if there is some kind of demand drop, you see it immediately in the eCPMs actually.
So one last silly question. So if you had to choose hyper-casual or messenger games? One word each.
I said we were coming from the hyper-casual part. I remember the time from Flappy Bird and so on. It was great times. But now we see, especially the potential, or let's say like the living time of a game, of a hyper-casual time compared to a more complex messenger game, for example. I would always decide for the messenger game because at some point it was just, I think we developed we released back then, the times, it was like 2016, we released like 3 games every week. So it was just like tons of content we were pushing out at some point. Why we did this? Not because we had to just, hey, we are so creative, but we know it, it was basically we have to bring out a lot of content within a very short pace of time. Otherwise, you're losing the users again. So it's more efficient, more beneficial for you as a company to focus on, let's say, a few top games, further develop them and make them better, instead of just, being in the hamster wheel and throwing out like tons of games all the time and hoping that you have a next hit to keep the amount of users stable at some point.
I like making a game with 30 frames per second that doesn't feel like the phone's going to blow up in 10 minutes, which is the main reason why I don't like these messenger games just from a tech perspective. I hope in the future it gets better, and at that point I think the story will be different. But to me, they're not really instant games still. They're just HTML games that you have to load. There's nothing really instant about it. I think the technology can be greatly improved. And at that point, I think it's going to be really, really interesting. But right now, I can't create really strong, high-fidelity games like I can on iOS and Android and replicate that experience on Messenger currently. But in the future, I think that could change. Yeah.
I have to disagree. You can build 2 dots or whatever very easily. I mean, in HTML5. For sure. Yeah.
I mean, I have. We've made 2 dots in HTML5, and it was great. Actually, some of our best playable ads were these. But I think still there's technical problems when you try to port these. They have to be really small. You have to load the game all the time. There's I think still a lot of improvements that can be made from a platform perspective on Facebook that are just not there yet. But I'm not arguing with the fact that we can replicate the experience of 2 dots, but World of Warcraft, no. With the current technology the way it is now, Need for Speed, no CSR, not going to happen. So, I mean, for me, I want that experience, and I think it'll come in the future. But it's just not there now.
Our tech makes it happen. I would have to say hyper-casual, but we're kind of stuck in we're not stuck in the middle, but we're in the middle where all our hyper-casual games have a messaging element and work really well, and we've just not moved into HTML5 yet because we've seen some performance things, so we're working on some tech which solves it. And but I think that probably, maybe not this year, but next year is when messaging will probably, it'll probably mainstream enough to be the next big thing.
I mean, like, just if you look ask yourself, what are you using mainly? Like, what is your main app you're using every day, right? So it's basically either a WhatsApp, or it's just one of the social networks, let's say, or the news app. So I think putting games within an app, which is basically one of your main apps, totally makes sense. So you don't have to go somewhere and download something. You don't have to convince your friend to download something. You can just basically, communicate with them, or play with them in the same app or medium or whatever you want to call it. So, I totally agree. I mean, at some point, it's technically wise, it's probably not. I would say, like, for sure you can build like a 3D game, but probably it would take ages to load it, definitely. But if you look at now, hypercasual is basically simple games, and like the 3D elements you can easily build. And you can see these kind of games also on Facebook Messenger, Helixjam, for example. It's a very easy copy of something we all know as well. So it's definitely possible. But yes, I mean, it's just two different platforms which require, on one hand, Unity. You can build like a game very easily in Unity, or on the other hand, you have to have a native JavaScript developer still who's building this from scratch, and it's a different.
I'm afraid we're going to have to stop it there. Yeah. But thank you very much. That was a really great discussion. I really appreciate it. A round of applause.
Guys.